The eviction moratorium will again soon be expiring, and whether we continue to kick this can even further down the road, that remains to be seen. But should we, in the name of humanity, or should we just let it expire and let the chips fall where they may? Or is there something more sinister going on behind the scenes that has nothing to do with pandemic-induced evictions at all? Hold on to your answer, regardless of how you feel about the subject right now. This is not what you think. Let's go. EpicBreakthrough.com is the creative financing breakthrough real estate investors are looking for. Get started with a list of 21 creative financing terms and deal structure templates to invest in real estate using more of your mind and less of your money. Epic is changing the game. Start now for free at EpicBreakthrough.com. Hi, my name is Matt Theriault, CEO of Epic Real Estate, where we show people how to invest in real estate so they can escape the daily grind and retire early. And I'm about to blow the lid completely off this moratorium eviction scam. And it will require a little bit of backstory for it to really hit home. You see, just like about every landlord on the planet, the initial COVID-19 lockdown back in March of 2020 had me a little nervous. When the eviction moratorium was first put in place via the CARES Act on March 27th, even more so. And this is when the anxiety really kicked in. You see, the month before the lockdown, here at Cashflow Savvy, where we help busy professionals build cash flowing portfolios so they can spend more time with their families and live the good life, we had sold several income properties, more than we normally do. February was a really big month for us. And as you might imagine, about a week into the lockdown, the phone started to ring from our panicking clients. Now, we were able to talk most of them off the ledge, but we did end up buying back 3 of those clients' properties due to we hadn't found tenants for them yet. And the feelings were we wouldn't find new tenants until the lockdown ended. So right now, I belong to a few different real estate investor masterminds that total probably close to 300 full-time real estate investors that I'm personally linked to, of which would probably represent, at least 30,000 income properties across the United States. And the text messages were flying on April 1st. Everyone was checking in with everyone to see if they had received their rents or not. Then a large number of us all got together mid-month via Zoom to compare notes and to compare plans of how we were going to navigate this crisis. Within the first 3 weeks of the eviction moratorium, I had one tenant that left and moved back home. She paid me partial rent for that month and left the place in decent condition. Regarding the rest of my tenants, I had collected 100% of my rents by April 15th. Not what I was expecting, but I wasn't complaining either. And during this Zoom meeting with my fellow investor friends, nothing really out of the ordinary for them in collecting rents either. Pretty much 100% of tenants were current. So we checked in again with each other the following month and same thing. And the month after that, same thing. The pandemic seemed to be having very little, if any, impact on tenants paying their rent, despite the eviction moratorium. Now, more than a year later, the subject at our mastermind meetings, it doesn't even come up anymore. In fact, quite the opposite. The rental business is as good as it's ever been for all of us. But by watching the news, I can't help but think, are we the exceptions? Are we just lucky or what? Because what's being reported on every news outlet that you come across, you're hearing and reading millions of people facing eviction when the moratorium ends. I've been covering the housing market here for a while. I'm very bullish on the future of the housing market based on everything that I've found and continue to find. I don't see a crash anywhere on the horizon. I'll put a link in the description to my most recent analysis. But what I keep noticing in the comments here are recurring comments about how as soon as the eviction moratorium expires, it's over. The market will crash when that happens. Mainstream media is throwing fuel on that fire by their constant coverage of the looming eviction moratorium crisis too. Shocker, I know, right? But here's a recent example of what I'm talking about. I got into an exchange in the comments with a subscriber, and he has since deleted it, unfortunately, because it was very educational. Nonetheless, I was able to grab a couple screenshots from my notification history. You see, in every story, there's what's factual and then there's what's actual. And I'll use this exchange as an example to explain. This subscriber's first post in response to my latest market report. Great analysis. I would like to share my thoughts on this. The major factor that will collapse the real estate market is when the eviction moratorium is lifted. Now, because he deleted this, that's as much as I could grab with a screenshot. But he went on to explain how 11 million people are facing eviction. And that was like the biggest number by far that I had found in my research. So I asked him to share the source. You know, I'm open, I want to know. And then he replied, the actual number is 15 million, and that 11 million was an understatement. But still, no source for this. He didn't share it. So I asked again, and he told me to Google it because YouTube wasn't allowing him to paste the link in the comments. Fair enough. I typically don't go this deep with people in the comments, but I was totally intrigued, so I couldn't resist. I did Google it, and sure enough, 4 of the results on page 1 referenced 11 million people. And then I searched the 15 million number, and here's what I found. Per aspeninstitute.org, more than 15 million people live in households that are currently behind on their rental payments. 7.4 million adults, 6.5 million households, which places them at legal risk of eviction. And the picture here for me started to open up. 15 million people in a headline sounds much worse than 6.5 million households. And at legal risk of eviction were interesting words too. That's gonna come up again. But I wondered, how many rental households are there in the United States? So I went over to Statista.com. And I even paid the $300 annual fee to get the complete data on how many households there are that rent. And the number in 2020 was 43 million. So 6.5 million households represent about 15% of rental households that are at legal risk of facing eviction when the moratorium expires. And that's tragic. That number not lost on me. That's very sad. Now, my next thought though was, what do the eviction numbers look like when there isn't a moratorium in place? You know, like pre-pandemic. So I headed over to evictionlab.org and found that annually 1 in 17 houses receive an eviction filing. However, the number is far less to those that actually do get evicted. It's 1 in 40. So less than half of eviction filings end up in actual eviction. So when you read the headlines, 15% of households are at legal risk of eviction, that seems like a real crisis. That's like 1 in 6 households. And remember that number, 1 in 6, compared to the normal amount of 1 in 40 that actually do get evicted. I mean, that's like almost 7 times the normal rate. Of course we're facing an eviction crisis, right? But then again, being a landlord who has never had to evict anybody, knock on wood, I couldn't help but wonder, why am I and all of my fellow landlords not experiencing this in our real world businesses? Where are these numbers in the media coming from? So I then went to National Multifamily Housing Council Rent Payment Tracker to check to see how many people are behind on their rent. And I found this right at the top, that 20% are behind. And it reads, 80% of rent payments have been made in August 2021 as of the 6th. Yet, in July, 94.9% of rent payments were made. That's like a 15% difference month over month. So right now, all signs, the most current signs, are giving this eviction moratorium crisis some serious legitimacy. Then I scrolled down a bit, and sure enough, in this chart, it shows that 80.2% of rents were collected by August 6th. But here's where it got interesting, where the lid of this crisis gets completely blown off. When you compare year over year, you'll see that last August, the number was essentially the same, 79.3%. And the year before that, 2019, the number was essentially the same then. 81.2% of tenants pay their rent by the 6th of the month, of where they then qualify to legally be at risk of eviction. So per this data, there are always about 1 in 5 households at legal risk of eviction, even more so than the 1 in 6 right now during the pandemic, with an eviction moratorium in place. When you scroll down the page a little bit further, you would see this. In July 2021, 94.9% paid their rent by the end of the month. 85% of those at legal risk of eviction are no longer at risk by the end of the month. And let's look at last year. 95.7% in July 2020. 96.6% in July 2019. Barely a measurable difference year over year. And the same goes for every single month. So, per the news, the facts that are shared are indeed facts. 1 in 5 renters not caught up on rent during pandemic by the 6th of the month, and at the legal risk of eviction. That is factual. But what's actual is that's always the number, pandemic or not, eviction moratorium or not. What's also factual that they are not sharing is that 9.5 out of 10 tenants do pay their rent by the end of the month. And what's actual, there too, that's always the number, pandemic or not, eviction moratorium or not. Bottom line, upcoming evictions may be a problem, but they're always a problem, and they are not a pandemic problem. Does that make you wonder whether an eviction moratorium was even necessary? If the expiring of it is even news? I mean, looking at the stats, we might as well continue to report breaking news. The sun came up again today. So what are your thoughts on this? Could the eviction moratorium just be a ruse conditioning us for government-owned housing, for socialism, or even worse, communism? I don't know. There's a lot of ways to interpret this data. Let me know your thoughts below. I do want to know. And who else do you know that needs to see this? When their name comes to mind, please share it with them. Oh, and if you've already subscribed, I went ahead and I pulled this video out special for you to watch next. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks for watching.